Hello, everyone, and welcome to the series of Fireside Chats by Women Tech Network. We are inviting phenomenal and outstanding women to inspire and empower you to grow professionally. Today, we have a special guest, Nishiura McKenzie, co-founder of the new Stanford VMware Women's Leadership Innovation Lab and lead strategy, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, collaborating at the intersections of two organizations. Lori brings 20 years of marketing strategy and business management experience at companies including Procter & Gamble, Apple, eBay, and PayPal. She is a board member of the Alliance for Girls and Watermark and an advisor to the Women Startup Lab. Lori was also one of our keynote speakers at Women Tech Global Conference 2020, as well as a panelist, and provided lots of valuable insights. Hi, Lori, and welcome.
Thank you.
Super excited to have you with us, and thanks for making time for this chat today.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. For everyone who is tuning in, feel free to ask your questions in the chat or the comments, depending on where you're watching us at. And whenever you hear something that resonates with you, please do let us know. So let's get started. Lori, how did you become passionate about women's leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion? Were there some biases that you personally faced that encouraged you to go for it?
I think my passion started when I was really young. I was about 6 years old, and I remember this day really well. I was walking with my mom to the library, which was my favorite part of the week. We'd collect books. In the old days, you couldn't just order them, to your iPhone. And
yeah, like you can do now.
I know. So we had to walk. And as my mom and I were walking, these men leaned out of the car and made kind of fake Asian eyes at us and started shouting fake Asian words at us. And I was frozen. I didn't know what was going on. And I remember clearly my mom, who never let us say a bad word, flipped the guy off. And I realized, wow, just based on the way I look, people will make all these assumptions about me and threaten me. And so I think what it did for me was make me realize, because of my mom, that we have to stand up to be seen as equal humans in the world. And so I think it got started early. And then as I've progressed, I've seen it play out in different workplaces, and it's become my life's work.
Interesting. What were some actions that you took that were pivotal in reaching the stage of the career you are in today?
There is no clear path to being somebody in diversity, equity, inclusion. And so the way I thought about it was I started in the world of marketing. And what marketing really teaches is the ability to listen to your audience, to see what the audience needs in order to match the product to what they want. And that ability to listen deeply, to really understand what's needed, is a skill I've then leveraged into diversity, equity, inclusion. I got this job at Stanford so that I could be around the best research and best experts, bringing my ability to listen to that. And I think bringing the two sides together, the ability to think about our audience, the ability to think about the best research, and then hopefully produce works that make an impact in the world.
It does make an impact. I do love what you're doing. Your research is incredible and so needed. And that's why we are having this conversation, because I want everyone who is part of our community to learn about it in depth, and also to share with others so we can amplify this message and to spread. Because I feel that often people are not even aware of some biases, or they think, yeah, this is not me, I don't have this, right? So I think when you study something that profoundly, you can understand the nature behind it. And then once you put it in the perspective and share with others, and we can learn about different needs and challenges and how we can address them. did really like that. And I like the point that you mentioned about marketing and actually listening to your audience. That's a really good skill. And I think that everyone should learn something about marketing and become, it will help you become better regardless of which role, whether you're an employee, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're managing a company organization.
I think you're right, Anna. I've seen a lot more emphasis on brands. So women can have, for example, our brand. What is the brand that you're trying to promote? Companies have employee brands, meaning how are they attractive to people or not attractive to people? So I think you're right. This idea of thinking about how you present yourself, how you're seen by others, and how you listen to who others are, maybe I'm biased, is a skill I think is really important to have.
How did you decide to get started in marketing first? What like kept fascinated you about this field?
My first field of study was economics, and the thing I liked about it is you kind of started to understand the shape of markets, what forces drive market shifts. And then I started to be interested in that from a personal level. How do people decide what to buy? How does something become really popular without a driver of it? And so I think this interest in the way markets move has always been there for me. I've always loved to travel internationally and see the differences between different cultures and even how one product is marketed differently in other countries. I used to be fascinated by that. And so I think this interest in how things move on a macro level have always been interesting to me. And even when you think about research, the point you made earlier, how does word get out about research? Does it stay in the academy? Does it have impact? These are questions I think I've always been interested in. And so I feel like bringing a diversity, equity, inclusion lens to those questions is really needed in these times. When we look at the scale and scope of the issues we're dealing with today, we need thinking that helps us achieve it both on a personal level, but then on a macro level as well.
So true, totally agree. You have 20 plus years of professional experience in different areas of expertise, and it just sounds super impressive. And in fact, the research, as I mentioned, that you do, I find it, and the more I learned about the things that you are doing, the more things that I have discovered, and I understand. The more you know, the more you don't know. You understand, because the more in depth you go, the more you understand. Okay, there are so many important aspects. There are so many important points. So my question, I want to ask in the beginning of our conversation, not to prolong it, postpone it for the end of the conversation. So what were some things that you wished you knew earlier in your career? Maybe at different stages of your career. That would be like when you started, and in the mid of your career, and where you are right now.
When I started, I was so enthusiastic. I thought I could do anything. I really did. Maybe that was hubris. I don't know. And so I was really focused on achieving and less focused on understanding the landscape of work. And as you progress up the organization, how the organization works is really critical to career advancement. And I wish I could tell my younger self to achieve, yes, that's really important, but understand how things get done at levels above you. Because to be promoted, often it's being known and seen in those executive or more senior levels. And if you don't really understand how they work, I kind of ignored them. I kind of thought it was more important for me to get my work done. So that's something I would have told my early self. And what I didn't realize is that different projects have different kinds of visibility. In a very early project at Procter & Gamble, I got to work on a program that was a side program, but was a very big driver of profit. Mm-hmm. That really set me off in a good place in my career, because it had a lot to do with the profitability of my small group. I got to present to the general manager when I had only been there a year. It was considered kind of a side project, but because it was about profit, I got visibility. And I didn't know that when I was entering, the workplace after business school. So figuring out what drives interest from executive teams, making sure your projects enable you to get visibility around those, can be a career accelerator. And that was something I didn't know when I entered the workplace. I had good luck, maybe not as much strategy.
Yeah, so it sounds like women should be in early stage of their career, and some of our community members are in early stage. So it sounds like they should be super strategic about which first project they choose, right?
Yes, if there is an opening to have that conversation with your manager, take it. I don't know if you've seen the Lean in McKenzie report, but they show that women often don't even make the first promotion to manager. Last year's data said women were 20% less likely than men to get that first promotion. Black women were 40% less likely. It's not because they're not skilled. They got in the position. Often it's the assignment they get. And for managers of people getting their first assignment, here's something we know. Women are the least likely to get a skilled manager for their first assignment. So they're given a first-time manager who is less connected. Remember, I talked about being connected through the organization. Their manager is less likely to be able to help them make those valued connections, doesn't know to give them a good assignment. So bringing that all together, you could see that that first broken rung really happens because we're not giving entry-level women the right first assignments, the right first managers, and the accelerators to have them be successful in their careers. It's all fixable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting what you're sharing about the managers and the assignments and how it influenced the career in general, right? Recently I came across one post on LinkedIn, which got over 40,000 reactions, where a successful woman in tech, she's also a founder, shared that she made a common mistake that many women do, taking less time to introduce herself. She explained that everyone at the networking event took 2 minutes to introduce themselves, but she took only 30 seconds or so. And I'm wondering, why does this happen? And what can women do to introduce themselves in a powerful way and take that time?
That's such a great question. And it's kind of nuanced. There's something called a likability penalty. So research shows that when women act authoritative, self-promoting, like we expect leaders to, they often get some pushback because now they're not behaving in a stereotypical feminine way. A stereotypical feminine way is being supportive, thinking about others, not promoting yourself, promote your team's work. It's not right that this happens. It's a stereotypical function. So an introduction could be seen as a self-promotion. So if women have been criticized in the past for promoting their own expertise, you can see how they might pull back. Now, what I've discovered the trick is to figure out how to talk about your expertise in a way that doesn't seem as though you're violating those norms of femininity, but you still get your point across. Now, I just want to make a point. It's not fair that women have to do all that work. Men can just say, I led this, I did this, and not face, and well, white men can do that without facing any of the pushback.
Yeah.
So here's what I recommend. If you haven't thought about your elevator pitch, I would put some thought behind it, because it might make it easier for you to say it in those 2-minute moments than having to think of it on the fly. And if you're trying to think about this likability penalty, what I've noticed, if I talk about achievements in kind of just a matter-of-fact way, people are less likely to think of me as bragging. So I might say, my name's Lori McKenzie. I am the co-founder of the Stanford VMware Women's Leadership Innovation Lab at Stanford University. We believe we can bridge the gap between theory and practice to accelerate change. And I'm the lead strategist at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where we're trying to reshape what it is to be a leading organization in the world to develop purposeful and principled leaders. So those are facts. They're less likely to sound like bragging. Now, again, it's not fair that we have to be so careful, as opposed to if I said, I'm really considered one of the leading voices in gender equality in the country. I should be able to say that, but maybe starting with the data will enable your elevator pitch to be heard. Again, it's extra work, but what I found is it's really important to be seen as your expertise. So don't pull back, just think about how to deliver it.
I like that. And I like how masterful you used the words we, right? You started with I, my name, and then you say we help, we do this. You projected basically already. People start to think, to imagine how they could be potentially, how they can receive value from working with you, for example. Oh, that's interesting, actually, what they do, what they like, their organization, what the initiative does. So basically started with, hey, my name, or I am, hello, and then projecting it what we do as an organization or as a company. And then there are great examples that you shared. And unfortunately, women have to do this, otherwise they won't be, as you shared, like ability penalty, they can receive that. And to be honest, I've been also using the strategies that you shared in we. I was I am still part of the Founder Institute, a promo of a Founder Institute.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Well, and basically when we were pitching to people, to like, what do you do? And I would also say we help talented and motivated founders to start and run successful companies. So we also were using not I person, but saying we, and that came kind of unnaturally because we have a global network. But now when you are explaining all the things, and I started to think and understand more why this happens, and I think it's really useful for everyone, regardless whether you are at the beginning of your career or where you're already senior. And because we still introduce ourselves, whether online or offline, we still do that.
And Anna, I love what you said, because you didn't go one way or the other. You skillfully blended the two. Sometimes women go too far and they only say we. And the interpretation from the other side is they didn't do anything. That's an inaccurate interpretation. So I love how you said it's blended. I am the co-founder. We, right? So it's what's called self-monitoring. It's using both skillfully, not automatically, can help you be seen and heard the way that has the most impact.
Yeah, this hybrid model, right? Like start with I, continue with we, and focus on call to action, right?
Yeah.
Right, that's super interesting. I'd like to move into the leadership and the definitions and the words we use. And more often than not, people tend to favor this narrow definition of leadership, which often has the agentic traits of leadership, like independent, big thinker, risk taker. And the stereotypes around men are more aligned with this definition. How organizations can recognize and promote female leadership, especially when it comes to tech and female leadership? How can women achieve a leadership position in predominantly male field?
That's a great question, because you're talking about stereotypes. The way stereotypes influence our decision is it makes people seem more suited or less suited for a job without us knowing it. So when I say the word chief technical officer, and you close your eyes, what kind of person comes to mind? Probably a tall man, right? Not even a short man.
But probably my already, since I met some female CTOs, it's already mixed. But yes. Of course, naturally, like it's like hard to find. You need to cherry pick these female CTOs, right?
Right, like Megan Smith, who was CTO of the United States, right? But still, when you look at the percent women CTOs in the US, it's under 5%, right?
I think the worldwide the situation is the same. So yeah.
So what happens is whoever looks like your stereotype gets a pass. Oh yeah, there's a CTO. I'm going to listen to that person. Whoever doesn't match that stereotype, oh, is Megan Smith, did they say she's CTO of the United States? How did she get there? Is she qualified, right?
Yeah.
You start putting someone through more scrutiny when they don't match the stereotype. So part of what you're talking about, Anna, which is really smart, is if I say a CTO needs to be a technical expert who has the ability to pull together teams to solve thorny technical issues. I've just broadened the definition of success from not just being drives outcomes, technical lead, brilliant. I said also must be skilled at bringing together teams to solve issues together. By broadening that definition of success, I'm less likely to fall into a stereotypical response. I might think a little bit, use my slow thinking brain about all the kinds of people who curate great technical teams, who are technical experts. And by broadening that definition of success, I'm more likely to see the talent that I might have overlooked if I only said, I want a CTO to be the person with the most patents.
Right.
Right? So by broadening definitions of success, more people come to mind. And hopefully the women who might not have, for example, had as many patents, because there's bias in the patent process, can now be seen as a candidate for success. So that's what you skillfully called broadening the definition of success. So more women or people of color or people from other national origins can be seen. They have the talent, but they're not able to be seen when we define success very narrowly.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to show and bring more role models that look like CDOs, and like to break this, and well, what you said, to broaden, but also to bring and say, hey, that's how a CTO can look. Like, don't think only about the male, white male CTO, and limiting your or narrowing your definition of what a successful CTO can mean, for example, or a successful woman in tech.
Right. So even thinking about images, if I were putting together PowerPoint about CTOs, am I only pulling from one kind of person? Am I thinking, oh, Megan Smith, right? So how we make these automatic assumptions, we should try to catch ourselves and say, how can I broaden the role models that I'm bringing into things like panel discussions and to images? Because as you said, it can slowly start to reframe success in our minds, but also be, I guess, fodder for justification. We say, no, I think we should consider this skill set as well. Look at the CTO discussion we just had. They said both team leadership and technical expertise was needed, right? So it can help us also argue for a broader definition of success.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I like that. Especially event organizers. When it comes to tech events, I see that there's a dramatic lack of females in tech of different skill set, but specifically female CTOs. So a good point to consider is first to broaden your thinking, to broaden your vision and the way you define CTO, the way you define a success. I'd like to dwell upon one other common bias that women face, which is the performance bias. How can women block this bias, and what could be done on the management level to eliminate it?
So it's really important to think about performance bias. And the way it works is, for the exact same level of performance, the woman is rated lower than the man. And I've heard this on some technical teams. When the women present their code, they are told to go rework it. And the men, even if they have the same number of issues, are told, oh, fix those, but here's the next level. So what happens over time is the man seems to be more productive than the woman, but what's really going on is her performance is being questioned and scrutinized much more than his is. And then over time, when the organization says, oh, who's your top performer? He looks like it, even though she is performing equally well in the organization. You see this in resume studies as well, where two equally qualified people, right? The man is more likely to get the job if the field like tech is male dominated. So what can women do? One thing is to really promote your technical expertise on your resume or LinkedIn profile. You said the point earlier that women tend to take less time when they make in-person introductions. Women often also put less technical expertise when they are presenting themselves in written format, for example. They might focus more on skills like bringing the team together and less on the technical issues or expertise that they have. So one way you can try to, at first, limit the bias from affecting you is making sure your written documents fully capture your technical expertise. And then in the interview process, if, for example, you're not asked technical questions because they've already kind of made up their mind that they only ask men, again, it's because of bias, men technical questions, you can talk about your technical expertise even in a response to other kinds of questions, right? So thank you for asking about how I led the team. One of the critical contributions I made was identifying this technical issue and making sure that we put all our issues to addressing it in these 3 ways, right? So you can keep presencing your technical expertise. For managers, one way to prevent or to mitigate bias is to be really clear about the criteria you're using to evaluate. Because what I was just describing is that men and women often get evaluated differently. And by holding the bar steady, that's one way. And I'll give you an example. We had one graduate student who sat in numerous interview sessions with the whiteboard at a tech company, and then the interview roundups when managers talked about the candidates. And what he discovered was that even though coding was the most important criteria, for women, they combined coding with how she presented. So the women would get comments like this: she can code, but she can't convince me. She can code, but she's just not very good at presenting her logic. Well, maybe they weren't listening for her logic because she's different than they are, right? So if I were a manager in that case, I would say, you know, we said coding was the most important criteria. You've combined coding and presentation. Let's separate them and put everyone who passes the coding into the potential candidate pool. Now, this thing about presenting, did you equally look at every presentation, or did we really over-index in looking at the women's presentation? Because if that's the case, I feel like that's not an even playing field. We should have a separate session or section to talk about presentation. I really want to focus on coding ability. So if I were a manager in that situation, really getting skilled at weeding out this extra scrutiny that women are getting and focusing the team on evaluating based on the criteria we said was most important is how I would work to try to mitigate bias in that situation.
Oh, wow. I think if all the managers do in this way, we would have had already more women in tech, to be honest. Well, this totally makes sense. And what you're sharing is like or she doesn't look just like me and I don't think she can be good enough. Yeah, she can code, but this and that, she didn't convince me what you said. So yeah, this is good point to actually separate this 2 categories and not to blend them in and not to take it as one thing. Really, like, you know, a very important point. I think more managers should know about it, and more hiring specialists, I think, just they often overlook these things. And I did really like what you said about women and blocking the bias and taking this kind of a proactive approach, and not to forget to mention your technical skills and your achievements, right? Like, thanks for asking, and on top of that, I was doing this and that, right? So even if they didn't ask you, not to wait for this special invitation to be asked about this, but rather to take this proactive approach to mention it, like if you want to get this role, of course. Yeah. Srinthi is sharing here. I have been in interviews where I was told I'm too extrovert to be a coder. Yeah. Like
That's
only
really
introverts can be coders, right?
right. And
Yeah.
it's funny because whiteboarding as a process is extroverted because you're talking to people as you're working. So that's kind of ironic. And
Yeah.
that's what we would often call the ever moving bar for women. The introverted women are told they're not speaking up. The extroverted women are told they're too extroverted. But the men can sail through extrovert or introvert, right? So managers and processes need to be able to catch this double standard that women are facing, people of color are facing, in order to make sure we hire the best talent, not just the talent that feels stereotypically right to us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, good points on that. When it comes to nurture and inclusion in the workplace, there is no such thing like a magic wand that could do wonders, and it takes time to cultivate the inclusive culture. And what you are sharing, and bits by bits, we can contribute towards creating a modern workforce, but also we need to make sure that we are inclusive. So what can organizations do and people in the organizations to use the language in the daily communications that is more inclusive, whether face-to-face or remote?
That's a great question. I think it starts with what are the company values? And that's all words, right? I was working with one startup, and there were some behaviors where the men were speaking over women experts and really taking them down. And people in the organization complained about this. So I said to the leaders, well, what are the values of how people are supposed to behave with one another? And they said, oh, they should be understood. And I said, well, we don't always understand things in exactly the same way. Remember that old game telephone where I say something to you and then you say it to them, and by the end when it comes back, it's
Yes,
not
totally
what we
different
thought
thing.
it
Yeah.
was? And that's exactly how values work. We think everyone knows how to be inclusive, but we don't talk about the behaviors that we value in our organization. So in team meetings, for example, we know that if you're inviting 6 people to your meeting and their time is really valuable, isn't it interesting that in general, we tend to hear from 3 people 60 or 70% of the time? It means the other people are playing these minor roles. So in team meetings, some of the language of inclusion might be what I call soliciting information. Instead of letting people compete to have the most say, what if it were the team leader's job to make sure that we heard from everyone in order to come to better decision making? So language that solicits could look like me saying something, Anna, I love the way that you've thought about this global community of women. Could you share your experiences in starting that in order to drive this conversation forward? I've just elevated you. I've let everyone know your expertise, and I've given you the stage. Those words are the language of inclusion. Elevating people, creating a stage for them, and making sure that they have time and space to speak. Another phrase I've heard is a negative question. So oftentimes people align really quickly, especially if a leader has an idea. It's called group think. We all tend to want to agree. One very inclusive thing to do is to ask a negative question. Could someone tell us a reason why we shouldn't do this? I've just opened the door to letting someone disagree with me with respect. It's called psychological safety. The idea that we can criticize ideas, not each other, in a way that then I'm not kicked out of the meeting and told never to come back, right? So part of the language of inclusion is allowing space for dissent in a respectful way instead of going to group think. And in group think, the dominant voices tend to be the only ones that we hear.
And that's a really good strategy. And I think it could lead to better decisions and better products or services in the end, because especially when you have a diverse group of people, probably someone will have something and say, well, I'm thinking that for this reason we shouldn't be completely, totally, or now go for it. So I think the more diverse team you have, there could be different opinions and the better products you can make, because you, like right now we live in a global world, and especially in a virtual world, right? And like when everything, like the borders have been like smashed, and like,
Right.
yeah, it's a very interesting moment we live in. But what I want to say that it's more than ever important to include a diverse group of people so you can make better products, better services for the better outcome for the humanity, especially when we're looking on the lookout for finding the remedy to battle COVID. So I think that this is more than ever to include and to value the diversity of thought.
I agree. And even if you have people with different perspectives, experience, and knowledge in the room, if they're not being heard, you've kind of wasted the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, should be very attentive not to do that. You have these people, so make sure their voice is heard so they can contribute towards making something better. I'm thinking one question comes to my mind. How can companies cultivate diversity and inclusion when working remotely from home? Like, one thing is when you see each other and you meet, you have this face-to-face communication. And so how this is, and in maybe from your observation, maybe you've done some research, is the situation getting better towards diversity and inclusion? Do people start to understand other people better and say, hey, we actually do need, and now more than ever we need to unite and to work together, even when we're remote, we still need to, and maybe people started to care more about others and to understand their challenges. Or is it going down, and companies are more focusing on, I don't know, staying afloat, surviving, just doing their stuff?
We see both trends happening at this time, Anna. So partly you do see what I call the personal becoming professional, where we can't just leave our work lives at the office and our home lives at home. We are working from home predominantly.
Yeah.
And so the idea that they're completely separate has broken down, and it has required good managers to care about that intersection. So for example, if I know a school district is closed and my employee has small children, asking, how can I help schedule meetings so that you can deal with this disruption from the pandemic? So that's been the positive, that the personal has become professional, and we know in general people thrive better when they're not making those decisions on their own, but when they're made by the team, right? So this person can take these hours because that's when they are able to work, and this person can't work those hours because of child responsibilities, and together we can come up with a schedule that works for everybody. But if we each have to manage it, I might get a schedule that doesn't work for you. But so anyhow, that's been the one positive. The downside is around the valuation of who's valuable, the valuation of performance. So if you think about the latest, again, the Lean and McKenzie study that showed that we're at risk of losing, I think they said 1 in 4 women during the pandemic, because they're unable to really manage childcare, the impact of racial inequity, having to care for elderly parents, or even our own mental health needs.
Yeah.
This is a really stressful, unprecedented time. And here's one way that managers may unconsciously be preventing women from staying in the workplace. If we only value people who stepped up during the pandemic, we needed extra people in customer service. And this person was able to not only do their job, but do 3 hours in customer service, right? If we only value people who stepped up, what we're going to unconsciously do is devalue people who had to lean out. It doesn't mean they're not contributing. It just meant that they didn't have the bandwidth to raise their hand and do extra work at this time. Or maybe they did need to reduce their work a little bit. We're in a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So if managers aren't careful about how much they're valuing stepping up and accidentally or inadvertently devaluing the lean out, when we look at who gets to stay, who gets promoted, who gets rewards, the stepping up people will rise to the top. They're predominantly men with good circumstances, white men who aren't dealing with other issues like racial inequity. And if we look at the impact of that decision over the next year, it could be really, really dramatic. So going back to criteria again, if organizations aren't overtly discussing how they're going to deal with the step up, lean out dynamic, we're going to see a dramatically different workplace. Something we could have prevented by having those discussions and making sure people are valued for stepping up, and yet not at the expense of devaluing those who need to lean out. If we don't have these discussions, I'm really concerned that we're going to see the impact of this in the next year, and it won't be something that we're happy about ending up with.
I hope these discussions are happening because, I wouldn't want to see down, women are becoming less in the tech space that we actually are now. Because as you said, there is too much on women's shoulders, and I can feel it on my shoulders as well. Being a woman, being a mother, being a wife, and a friend, many things, so many roles, many hats we are wearing as women, and we need to balance it, and we need to deal with different situations. And I think for everyone faced challenges during this pandemic in one way or another, but women are definitely more affected, and there are many stats who confirm these facts. So I think that this conversation should happen in the organizations. Otherwise, the outcome could be really dramatic and in a negative way, this word. So really, I'm very grateful that you brought it up and showed this, dynamic and how it could be. It's quite common that when we talk about diversity and inclusion and gender equity in the workplace, it translates mostly to white women. And on top of that, a lot of organizations hire people of color in a very low level, entry-level positions, mid-management, where they don't have a lot of equity or decision-making power. What could be done about that?
This is such an important point, and it's one that one of my colleagues at the lab studies deeply. Her name is Dr. Melissa Abad, and she does work specifically on women of color in tech. Now, here's one of the things that we don't recognize. If a woman of color has navigated all those barriers and made it into the workplace, she has wisdoms that are far greater than her technical abilities. You see, if someone else sails through the system without a single hitch, they don't know that much about how the organization really works. But if someone has had to do all this extra navigating, they have all this insight into the barriers, the way promotions really work, that if the organization's leveraged, they could produce better run organizations by leveraging those wisdoms that not only helped women of color thrive, they would help everyone thrive. Who wants to be in a workplace that only advantages one kind of person, right? So here's some of the wisdoms we can think about. We often undervalue how networks influence our decision-making. That we trust people so much more if we have a personal connection. So when someone's up for a promotion and they have that acceleration of, I trust them, I know their work, I feel confident voting for them. We often don't realize that we're giving extra points to people who we're closely connected to in our network. And if we're one of the people who is closely connected to leaders, we might not even notice that we've been accelerated by that. We might say, no, I'm just really talented. I've worked hard for this, right? But if a woman of color who's been excluded from those networks sees this dynamic and has figured out other ways to position herself for success, she has so much insight into the way the organization runs that if leaders listen to that and redesigned access to key projects, promotions, spending time with leaders, they would broaden their bench of talent. They wouldn't just rely on the one person who happens to make their way to the top. They would be curating a larger, more diverse, more talented bench that's promotion ready. So one of the ways that we can think about the value of diversity is not only the great ideas that we get from people from all different backgrounds, but getting access to the hidden rules of work so that we can redesign the overt or explicit rules of work so they work for more people, not just the people who happen to look or be like the leaders in our organizations.
Yeah, this is a really good advice, and I think that by having women of color in a driver's seat, we can really change the game in a positive way. And as you said, they have learned so much because they've navigated and encounter different challenges, situations. So I think there should be, and I hope there will be, and I want to believe that Black Lives Matters movement is raising awareness about very important matters, in a sense that there should be more women at different industries at the management level, and being active part of the society community. And I don't know why it didn't happen before, because it's like should have been already years ago. And just right now, and with all the movement, I feel that we are getting closer, and I hope, and I see lots of support from the world, from the communities, how and we also we recently had Women Tech Mid-Atlantic Conference. We had excellent speakers, women of color, Black women, and I want to see more women and Black men and people of color, different conferences. This shouldn't be of an option. This should be already even 50-50, if you want. So, and I want to see more positive change, and we are working also as an organization in that direction. Here are questions, many questions, and before we send our final message, I would like to ask some of them. Here's a question from Pinar: how to differentiate a gender-biased feedback from a genuine one that would help one grow? As in, how do you know if you're simply not good enough because you don't fit into the stereotype for that role, or you really should take that advice seriously and work on yourself? Since you have both mentioned women get criticized for things men tend not to.
That's a really great question. It's very nuanced, isn't it? There's kind of two sides to it. One is, how can I differentiate between biased and genuine or authentic feedback? And then at what point does it become, that you're spending too much work dealing with the gender stereotype, and what could you do about that? So to differentiate between gender biased feedback and feedback that is authentic, I often think about what the goal of the feedback is. If the goal of the feedback is to correct something you're doing that's really not germane to your job. So for example, if someone says, in meetings, you really speak up too early, and I feel like people think you're self-promoting. Notice the person hasn't said anything about whether your ideas are good, whether your presentation has had an impact, whether what you're saying positions you as successful. So one of the things I try to do is separate and listen for, does this really have to do with the job? Or does it sound like kind of the wrapper around the job, which might be gendered? If I think it's the wrapper, I might start to ask some questions. Thank you for the feedback. I just wanted to ask some questions about how you came to, did I hear you correctly in saying that in team meetings, really people who speak up early aren't really welcome? Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and who does speak first then, if you're saying speaking first isn't valid, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I would try to get underneath that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there's a grain of gold inside of it. What they're saying perhaps is the perception is running them the wrong way, not what's happening. Now, it's unfair that I have to deal with people's perceptions. And yet I know that I could develop some skills to be more effective in those situations, right? So remember, Anna, you talked about communal and agentic, the we versus I. I think it's great that someone speaks up first. One of the things, depending on how big the meeting is, I might say, for example, I'm so glad you brought up that point. That's critical. Here's what I have to say about it. That's this balance. So if it's that it's being perceived that you're not being effective, but you get an inkling because you've done some probing that it's gender bias, I might just pull some tools out of my toolkit to try to deal with the perceptions, because I want my ideas to be heard. Again, unfair that we have to do that extra work. Now, I think the second part of your question is, when does it become that you're spending all your energy dealing with those kinds of biases and feeling you're not able to spend your energy doing the good work that you need to do? And that's a decision everyone has to come to for themselves. It's kind of like a pro-con checklist. When I worked at one company, I got this really great advice. They said, I get this company's not a great fit for you, but it's a great company. So do you have a checklist of all the things you want to take from this company? What skills you want to develop? What projects that if you had and you decided to leave, you could say, I got everything I wanted from this company and now I'm ready to go. And that was really great advice for me, because I wasn't a long-term fit for that company, but I did make sure that my skill set was bolstered in the way that I wanted and why I went to that company in the first place. So that was useful advice. I hope it's useful for you as well.
I like that. I like that you managed to two components on how it could be potentially worked out. And it's important to ask questions to understand and not to have that feedback stuck in your hand and think, hey, I'm not just good enough. That's it. I should probably quit. I should quit tech or whatever industry I'm in, or just quit this job, etc. So the more questions we ask, the more accurate feedback we can receive, and then understand, hey, this feedback is biased because the person doesn't like me, or this feedback is valid and I can do something to grow and improve, right? So it's good to ask questions, and I really love that you mentioned that. Let's take one more question. I've noticed, here's another question. I've noticed that women tend to put pressure on themselves to be perfect in their job. Like they have to know everything about the field in order to be taken seriously. I know personally I have this fear that people won't take me seriously if I slip up. How do you combat thought of perfectionism?
That's a great question. And I think you might have heard of the phrase, perfection is enemy of the good. Right?
Yeah.
And I've even seen some work that says perfectionism is part of kind of a racist culture, that who gets to be seen as perfect. That very idea of perfection eliminates people from being seen as the top in an organization. So perfectionism is something that is mostly problematic. Now, what do you do for that about yourself? Sometimes I think about the conditions of success. Sometimes the conditions of success include having what some people call a posse. Some people call it your personal board of advisors. There's many names for it. Often the way we interpret what we're seeing puts us in a less good light than we really are, like those doubts. Maybe I can't do something unless I'm perfect.
Yeah.
When you have a group of people that you can trust and who will bolster you, you're more likely to take those risks. So if you wanted to do something for the first time and you were nervous because you were a perfectionist, ask, what are the conditions I could build in order to do that anyway that will kind of grease the slide for me to do it? One might be asking someone to coach me on my presentation. Another one might be a really powerful introduction that positions me for success. Another might be asking your friend to ask you all those questions you're afraid to be asked and practice answering them thoughtfully. So think about the conditions of success and how to set yourself up for success as opposed to focusing on being the perfect person for the job.
Good and wise advice. And here comes, since we already touched success, my question before we say goodbye is, how do you personally define success? And do you consider yourself to be a successful person?
Wow, that's a big question. For people who are motivated by mission, and I think many women are motivated by mission, wanting to make a difference. How I measure success is how I've had an impact. I think in my younger days, I viewed impact as maybe how many people I managed, how big my budget was, how many people listened. And I'm starting to redefine success into the quality of the relationships I have. Do I really reach out to people who are excluded from networks and spend time with them and elevate them? Even if I never get known for this, I know that I've been that kind of person. And so I've been redefining success for myself as the quality of the important relationships I have and how much I invest in them and their success, as together we move forward towards my mission, which is a world where all workplaces value their employees so that their employees thrive. And whether I'm successful, I would say at the current time, yes, because I'm really focused on the important relationships in my life and having them thrive and work. So thanks for that big and challenging question.
That's a beautiful definition of success. I do really love that. Never heard of this specific. That's why I was curious about your own definition. And I really love what you're doing, the way you're doing it, the energies that you are putting, the impact that it is making when you spread the word about the research that you have conducted. And I think that more people should know, and more people should try to understand the reasons behind the bias, try to change the way they think and the way they perceive the certain things, because we do have unconscious bias, but we can work on it, right? Because we can change things for better. The way only we can do, right? The way you can do, the way I can do, the way everyone who's listening to us can do. And I'd like to thank you for this. This is super engaging and interesting conversation. We've been receiving lots of feedback. People are thanking us. This was awesome. Good points. Thanks for the interview. Yeah, I did really enjoy, Lori. It was great. And we're looking to having you as a speaker at our future events. We are going to have global conference again and more events. And thanks a lot for your time. Keep up your fantastic research. Checking. One thing that I'd like to mention before we say goodbye, a great course that you did, Women Transforming Tech. I urge everyone to watch, and where Lori is sharing about breaking the bias. And there are good points on sponsorship, on networking, a great course on LinkedIn, and you can watch it, and it's excellent. I think everyone can take something new and some good tips, some good tools, strategies, techniques, and take something for themselves. Thanks, Lori.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for making this amazing network possible. It makes a difference.
Thank you. We also have now a networking. Who is everyone who's listening us on, who's joining us on Hopin? You can join the networking area, Lori. If you have some time, I know you're super busy, but if you have some time, stay with us. I know that people would love to meet you, and you can have just a quick chat with some of our community members. And yeah, if you can, please stay. If not, see you and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. So thank you, everyone. I did really enjoy how active you are today. And I see many people are joining us from different parts of the world, London, Nigeria, I saw in the beginning. I see also Armenia, US, Texas. Wow. Super diverse in Indonesia, Peru. It's great. I hope the time fits you and you join us. People are saying that it's a great event. Thank you very much. And yeah, if you like, your feedback is always important and welcome. And also feel free to share with people who might need. We'll have, we shared the link with the recording. So maybe drop this link to someone who needs to hear this and someone who can take really value, because Lori gave really valuable pieces of advice. And I think everyone can, especially those who are struggling, whether they're working in tech or in other industries, they can really take something and implement it in the strategies they use to grow professionally. Another thing that I'd like to mention is that we are having Women Tech Global Awards this December, and that nominations are open until the 23rd of October. So feel free to nominate an exceptional woman you admire, look up to, or think that she's awesome, or nominate yourself if you think that you fall under a category. Check out our categories on our website, womentech.net. We'll drop also a link here in the chat. The networking area is already on, so go ahead and do some inspiring and exciting networking. You will have time to connect with people from all over the world. Here is thank you from Algeria coming. And yeah, thank you very much for being such a great audience. I do really like how we interact and can communicate, and how you send positive vibe. And I believe that you feel the energies that was today at our chat. And we are going to have another chat in 2 weeks, and next week we are going to have also an interesting session with the Microsoft team, and we'll be talking about how to navigate your career and get into the leadership role. Very connected. We talked today about women's leadership as well. So join us, and I'm wishing you a great day, great evening, maybe morning, depending where you are, and see you online. Bye-bye.